Oh, my God, it's big, so strong, so mighty. My God's plans for me goes beyond my wildest dreams. There's nothing my God cannot do. There's nothing my God cannot do. There's nothing my God cannot do.
Well, welcome to Wellness Issues. We're just totally excited today about today's show. Again, I'm your host, Chris Sylvain, and we hope you have enjoyed being with us since we've started April 4th, with the show. I know I've enjoyed it, and for all of those that call in and listen, we've gotten so many comments, around the city and so forth. So, and even around the country from the internet, WBOKAM1230.com, and anybody who wants to call in at any time, 260-9265-504, 260-9265. You can join in on the conversation. But today, and believe me, when the whole concept of wellness issues had first started, we had this guest in mind because some people change the way you think, and I've recognized that over the years. I'm still young, I believe I am, but I recognize some people change the way you think. And Dr. Drury and her work has changed the way I've thought about so many things. So we in the studio today, we have Dr. Stacy Drury. She's a medical doctor and PhD, associate professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Tulane University. I'll tell you a little bit of background that I have. University of Virginia. She has a BA in religious studies and biology, also a MS in human genetics. She has a PhD in genetics and biometry, but also she is a psychiatrist at general residency at Tulane, and child and adolescent psychiatrist, her specialty, and she does practical work. Researcher par excellence. She's impressed me as a researcher. Out of all, we spend a lot of time interviewing researchers, but her discipline and study and the research that she does impacts people, the world, in a way in which, I've never seen it. We first interviewed her with health issues. I think it was concerning a Romanian study, Romanian children on telomeres. And we're going to talk about it more today, and I'm excited. Welcome, Dr. Drury.
Thank you so much for having me again. It's wonderful to see you and to be a part of this, so thank you.
Hey, no, we're thoroughly excited, and people on there, they'll get a chance to get an idea. Wellness issues is about mind, body, spirit, and wellness of the community and wellness of the individual. And the whole concept, if you think about it, you have the community and you also have the individual. You have wellness. We have what we eat, what we drink, whether we exercise, but also we have the community. Well, Dr. Drury's work, it's so amazing. As I say, it changed what we think. Her studies has looked at the connection between trauma and issues that children face, and literally, obviously, adults as they grow older, and how it affects their genetics. Let's do a little background, and then we'll talk about the current study, Dr. Drury.
So I am incredibly lucky to work with a really powerful team. So both my research staff and the other faculty that I work with at Tulane, so specifically Catherine Teal in the School of Public Health. And what we have been able to do is really build a program that takes important concepts that begin at the level of the community, incorporate family structure and issues, and then individual effects, because when we think about it, all of those factors play a role in how well we're able to cope with stress and really our resilience in the face of things that we can't control. And so, partnering with the School of Public Health and many great researchers, we've been able to really look at the impact of trauma at multiple levels, as well as the impact of protective buffers or things that might be sort of helping us be more resilient on child health and development. And so we look at it at many levels. So we look at child behavior, we look at child stress response, And then more recently, really looking at changes within the cells of every person as sort of a way to look at the impact and to see if we see the impact of trauma really early. There's a lot of evidence in the adult literature that these adverse childhood events, sometimes called ACEs, have a lasting impact on the health of individuals. So I love the fact that you talked about the mind and body and spirit connection. All sort of physical health really begins in the brain. The brain controls lots of our responses. And so things that we do that help us focus or relax or concentrate or learn influence our physical health just as much as they influence our mental health. And I think they're very intricately tied. And so what we have been doing is really looking at those factors and saying, are we seeing the impact of traumatic experiences or really adverse events that we know are related to adult cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, hypertension? Do those events actually have an impact that we can see earlier and to really detect it in children? And what we are finding, and I remain surprised every time we see it, is that we are seeing an impact or an association between changes in sort of the DNA of kids who have been exposed to increasing numbers of these early adversities.
Well, it started, I think, with the, I don't know if it started, but with the Romanian study. I know that was so huge, it, all over the country, the news media picked it up, and, the team. But even this recent study, what's so amazing about it is, what you guys found is that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can't hurt. That kids that were placed in traumatic situations or unloved, I call it love-starved situations almost, that it doesn't just affect them emotionally, it actually affects their genetic makeup, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we, and again, I say we because I'm incredibly supported and have lots of great people that I work with. But in this most recent study, we have looked at the family structure. So previously we had looked at community-level disorder as a predictor of telomere length. And we had also seen an association with prenatal smoking and telomere length. So both of those are ones at the community level and ones at the sort of direct level as factors that are influencing, lasting influences on a child's genetic makeup. And in this study, what we wanted to say was family is a very important construct. It's a very important context in which kids grow and develop. It's a source of support and buffering, and sometimes, if it's not stable, has been sort of thought of as a potential source of stress. And so we took 3 factors that we think are very predictive of stress within the household. So had any family member committed suicide? Was any family member incarcerated? And had the child ever witnessed a family member getting hurt? And those 3 factors in the kids that we looked at, and the kids were 5 to 15, and I do want to say that the kids were recruited from all over the greater New Orleans area, so we represented 87 census tracts. These children were not selected for anything other than they agreed to be part of the study. And so I think what I want to emphasize is this is not a super selective group. We weren't looking for trauma. What we saw was pretty striking. So 44% of the kids in our study had seen a dead body, which is about 10 times the rate of what we see at the national level. The exposure to violence in the home and physical discipline were, again, significantly higher than the national levels. And again, not as selected. Those are just our kids from our schools. And what we wanted to see was those type of events early in a child's life for adults predict shortened telomeres, so the caps at the end of your chromosomes that are related to aging, and also all these other negative health outcomes, so obesity, diabetes, hypertension. But would we see something in kids? So historically, we always think kids are way more resilient than us, right? So they can do a lot more, they recover faster from injuries. Would we even see an effect in young children of these events? And what we found was that we do. And we see a cumulative exposure. So after controlling for parents' age and how much money is in the household and all these other factors, we still found a direct effect of these three events, if they had happened in a child's life, and a cumulative effect. So the more that you had, the greater the impact on this marker of stress that you capture in your DNA.
So deep, so real into the DNA of a child. We usually think of DNA as just being something genetic and passed, and it's a set amount of genes or chromosomes or whatever, but they actually can become altered by a parent going to jail. And we've been talking a lot in the past few shows, particularly, and like I said, it's hard to talk about eating right when we have this level of incarceration going on. Louisiana's the incarceration capital of the world, mass incarceration, what we call it. And so the amount of, in certain neighborhoods, particularly the amount of, particularly young African-American men that are in prison, Dr. Peter Scharf, he had him on it, estimates go into 70, 80% in some neighborhoods of the amount of young men in prison. So obviously, would it be safe to say we can extrapolate if you have that many young men in prison, say in a particular neighborhood, Lower Ninth Ward or so forth, then we could easily go to those children and next door, around the corner, everywhere, and see shortened telomere length, most likely based upon.
I mean, I worry that that's something that we would see. And okay. I think it's, you said something that's really important, and I'm laughing because I'm working on incorporating it into our newest study, but the role of fathers as caregivers. So if we think about incarceration rates in general, it's probably going to be a male member of the family, although we incarcerate a lot of women too. And so, thinking about what that does to our family structures and the importance of both male and female role models for kids' growth and development, and to have our rates be so much more elevated than the rest of the country, it creates fractured families. And I think that the more we fracture families, we lose, we have this impact, but we also lose the ability to really buffer or protect the next generation of kids, and potentially change their expectations of what they're going to be capable of.
And that's the thing, because if we're affecting, again, father goes to jail, all right, mother, obviously income, everything shatters, and many times we're dealing with the schools and so forth. Okay, so all of these social issues aren't just social, because then when they go to the physician for regular checkups and everything, again, telomere length is not measured now, but over time we're affecting every part of the person's human system.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot about that in terms of our rates of obesity in our kids, our rates of diabetes, our rates of even elevated blood pressure in our youth are, again, super high. And to understand that that may be in part related to these adverse early experiences, it's going to force us to rethink how we treat them, right? It's going to force a sort of reconceptualization of obesity, not just as a problem of how much you're eating and how much you're exercising, but it's incredibly linked to stress. So how you tolerate stress, how you manage it, how you talk about it within your family. All of those factors may be critical to decreasing our rates of obesity and may be important in treating it. So if this is a function of sort of biological changes and sort of being chronically alert and stressed out all the time, just telling you to eat healthy isn't necessarily enough. We have to decrease the stress. We have to help kids and families process stress, to have an outlet to talk about it, to come up with new strategies to deal with this. So, how do we talk about our father's incarcerations, or how do we talk about what that means? How do we create a new support network for moms who are dealing with all these stressors? So I think there are lots of ways to create interventions. And if this research can be something that is an impetus for that, then I'm even more excited to do that. I mean, I think one of the challenges is always getting the research back to the community and saying, this is what I'm seeing, help me come up with a plan for changing this outcome. And if the science pushes policy and moves change forward, that would be fantastic. That would be sort of the ideal for the science.
Like we say in church, don't make me shout up in here. Literally, because policy, absent the science or understanding, places the blame, so to speak, when again, everybody's responsible for their own actions ultimately, no matter what. So we can throw that out the window. People are responsible, but it helps us understand the pressures that children are under, that young people are under, and the power that society has in making society. In other words, just as we're talking about laws that are made in Baton Rouge and Washington, how they can affect the DNA of children, so to speak.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the social determinants of health, there's not enough of the recognition that these social factors are not just social factors, that they have a health impact, and that they change not just behaviors, but biology. And the more you try to just say that they're social, it makes it easier to kind of ignore them and not deal with them or not create strategies to address them. But if we have to link it to biological changes to drive change, then I guess that's maybe where the science can be most powerful. The connection between behaviors, feelings, and actions and biology are things that all happen within the same person, so they can't be separated in my mind. And I think, when we are trying to figure out what to do with this information, I think there's a lot of things, right? So one thing is understanding that these experiences can have an impact. So even if kids look like they're not bothered by the fact that family members are incarcerated, or, there's been another shooting in the neighborhood and they see the body and they say, oh, no, I'm not bothered by it. Chances are that internally they may be being bothered by it. And recognizing that that is there and finding ways to have them be able to talk about those events, to process those events, to decrease the physiologic stress or changes that happen when you see something traumatic. My hope is that will lead us to really buffering and protecting kids. I wish I could stop community violence. We haven't been able to do that, but there are ways that we can stop its sort of lasting impact or scarring on the next generation. And I think that's part of my hope.
Awesome. Two things. You use the word buffering, and I love the concept of so literally not being helpless, that buffering can occur. And if we can talk about a little bit about that, but also healing in a sense, because telomere length, and I know we talked about that on the first show. I don't know if those studies are how we're coming as far as for the taking a person out of the violent area and bringing them to, instead of being love-starved, to love in excess, and its effect on biological health.
So I'm oddly a glass half full kind of person. And I do want to say that while it's really concerning to see this in our youth here, I don't think that means that this is a destiny or a fate pathway. I think that there are many things that can be done to change this. And I think it'll take us some time to get the science to demonstrate that it's changing. But in terms of something like telomere length, we know that exercise actually increases the enzyme that lengthens your telomeres. We also know that telomere length is a very dynamic process, so there's much we don't know about it, and we're still trying to learn all the different factors that can accelerate the enzyme that'll sort of lengthen and protect your telomeres. And so there's lots of things still left to learn. There's been one study in adults with prostate cancer that looked at social support during their cancer treatment. And the more social support they had, the longer their telomeres were at the end of treatment. And in terms of longitudinal studies in kids, there's only been one that's been published. And they found that a percentage of kids actually lengthened their telomeres between 5 and 10 years of age. So this is not something that is a fate or destiny. I think this is a warning sign. And I think it's a warning sign that our kids who see these kind of events, who are exposed to this sort of fractured families, are going to be more at risk, not just for mental health problems, but for physical health problems. And so as someone designing an intervention for obesity or for diabetes or hypertension, to not forget to evaluate the stressors and the trauma exposure and the fact that stress and biology go together.
it seems to me we have a new field being birthed, in a sense that it needs to, I mean, a discipline in and of itself. But let's talk about the social support. Let's define social support, love, those things. Does it mean just hugging children? I know it's just deeper than saying, oh, I love you and I'm going to hug you. Let's deal with that.
You ask a really good question because it's hard to measure. What we think of as social support is of a list of 20 different sources. Do you have someone that you can talk to? And do you access that person? So when we measure social support, we ask about family members, we ask about spouses or partners, we ask about siblings, we ask about community resources, so churches, rec centers, counselors, therapists. And we try to get a cumulative score about the availability of support, as well as are you willing to access it? And when you ask for support, is that support helpful? So I think there's 3 parts to it. So one is making sure that those type of supports exist, and everybody gets support differently, right? So what I use for support may be very different than what you use for support. And so it's about knowing what you feel comfortable with as support, knowing that it's okay to ask for support, and then making sure that the type of response that you get is helpful.
It makes me think about family structure. It makes me think about neighborhoods because, again, if we deal with the incarceration issue, if somebody's in a neighborhood, we have 12 square blocks or whatever, I always think about the block I grew up on, Buchanan Street, you know what I mean? And I had Leroy and them around the corner, Alvin and Andre and, Mr. Christoph and Mr. Jones and, all of those people that wouldn't mind whipping you if your mama didn't whip you, that type of thing or whatever that was there. And not really whip per se because there was I can't think about, say, child abuse, violence, that type of thing. It was just love, people who cared about you. So many people I could have went to on that block, and to talk to. Really, the whole block, when I think about it, across the street, the Moutons and all of them, I could have talked to them. But now it's shattered. It's gone. Because if you take, say, if me, Alvin, and Leroy would have all went to prison, what would have happened in that neighborhood? And so there's nobody there.
Or maybe only you and Leroy would have gone to prison, and Alvin could have served as that support network for the rest of the kids in the neighborhood. So I think, neighborhoods are untapped source. Okay. We all live in New Orleans for a reason, right? Like, we've had many times when it would have made sense to not be here. But everyone that lives in New Orleans, there is something special about being here that we are invigorated by. Why else would we be here? Yeah. And I think that part of that is the communities and the people that are here. And maybe what we need to be doing is building your sense of your community as your support network. So while I would love to, again, decrease rates of incarceration, but to know that if one of your family members is incarcerated, it's important for your kids and for you to reach out to other members of your community. Right. And that we understand that these things happen and, to make sure that the community responds in a supportive way. So even if you're not happy with why that individual is incarcerated, know that those children need that support. And they need it for their mom or their grandma, because grandmas are incredibly important in our communities too. Right. And, maybe that's something to pay attention to, which is they have this already big hit by not having a family member around because they're in jail. But maybe our communities need to be better at providing support for those kids and the rest of the family that's there so that the fractures can be healed by community.
Well, let's throw this into tone of voice and the way in which we talk to people. Can that be measured as far as for the anger, the angst, a calmness? Yeah,
so one thing about anger, and particularly anger in the setting of trauma, is kids who have been exposed to a lot of trauma, they call everything anger. So they call frustration anger, they call sadness anger, they call a little bit of disappointment anger. So they'll pick up on anger cues in adults much faster. And they will respond much more defensively. And trauma accentuates that. For kids, anger and aggression are not always the same things. So if I'm scared and I'm a kid, I might hit. If I'm scared and I'm afraid of one of my family members getting taken away, I might want to yell and scream at the police officers because I think they're going to take my dad to jail again. And when I'm a little kid, I don't have any differentiation. I can't know whether he's supposed to go or not. I just know my dad's leaving. And so if you think about that, if you think about when people are arrested, or if you think about domestic violence, when police come and arrest children, they come and arrest a parent to protect another parent, there's still a child sitting in that room watching, and all that child may be able to see is that's the person that took away my parent. And so I think about the tone of voice and the understanding what drives anger and how fear can often look like anger and fear can often look like aggression, and that trauma just sort of accentuates the whole thing is really important.
So amazing. And so groups, restructuring a neighborhood. What can neighbors do then? I keep saying neighbors because many times families can become so ripped and dysfunctional. What can neighbors, everybody's our neighbor, how does a neighbor step outside to people they even may be afraid of?
I think part of it is recognizing our role in the community. I mean, I think you have to own that we are part of this fractured community and that no one can put the glue in there. That's got to be our glue. So it is investing in the kids in your neighborhood, right? So those kids are going to grow up, and because we live in New Orleans, they don't go far. So to even just say to them, to acknowledge them, to say hello, to, if our kids are playing on the streets, to have grown-ups participate in those games, to spend time at the community centers that are popping up, to make sure that our playgrounds are clean, to spend time at our playgrounds. I mean, so we have all these new playgrounds that came in, get our children outside, have conversations, build neighborhood watches so that your kids can interact with each other and that they can start to build those networks. Work with our police force to create your neighborhood to be safer, right? So community engagement is incredibly important for law enforcement, but it's also incredibly important for education. So be a part of your school. Become part of a parent group at your school because there's going to be parents in there who are single parents or who have family members that are incarcerated, and so provide that support for them even within that setting. All of those things, I think, maybe having people recognize that could protect health will drive them to be a little bit braver.
And I guess that's the basis of the conversation, because it's not just having a nicer, cleaner society. We're literally dealing with people's health, the medical, the blood tests, the diseases that people have, regardless of things like ADHD and so forth. So when we bring all of this together, let alone ACT scores and functioning in the school system.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, education is an incredibly powerful thing. But for our kids, the other thing is that schools can become a safe buffering place, right? Sometimes we need to be a little bit more careful because sometimes not so good things happen right outside of our schools. But schools are where kids spend most of their day. So making sure that our schools are a safe place, a place where mental health and stress and recognizing distress is incorporated into the education part. If you're a parent and your kids are in school, become involved in the school. Go and help at the school, become an advocate of it.
I think we have about 30 more seconds if we can. From a policy standpoint, I don't know, how this stretches. Does it, any quick policy, nothing's quick in policy, but from a communal level, obviously government.
I think that we need to invest in high-risk families, that we cannot separate treatment for parents and kids, both medically and mental health, and that the concept of stress being a biological thing and influencing mental health and biological health has to be within the family system.
Dr. Stacy Drury, I would hope the Times-Picayune and all of the news media, please call. This information has to get out. I don't know if I'm making it good, if this is good or not, but it has to get out. Done. Wellness issues. Do your best. Fight as hard as you can. Thank you.
Searched all over, couldn't find nobody. I looked high and low, still couldn't find nobody great